When one of the biggest men on the planet boarded a commercial flight from Atlanta to Los Angeles and sat down in seat 2A, nobody in that first-class cabin said a word. It was Tuesday, September 17, 2024. Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, Gate C-19, 7:42 a.m. The airport smelled like coffee and jet fuel and the specific kind of anxiety that fills departure terminals before 8 a.m. The gate area was almost full. Families with strollers, business travelers in dark suits checking phones, a group of college students in matching red shirts, already asleep on each other's shoulders. Announcements echoed overhead in the flat, neutral voice that airports use to make everything sound ordinary. Shaquille O'Neal, 7 feet 1 inch tall, 325 pounds, walked through the gate with his carry-on bag in one hand and a coffee cup in the other. He wore dark jeans, a plain gray sweatshirt, and white sneakers the size of small boats. He had to turn slightly sideways to pass through the jetway door. He always had to turn slightly sideways. He had been doing it his entire life. He found seat 2A. He folded himself in, his knees pressed against the seat in front. He adjusted, angled, negotiated the geometry the way he always negotiated the geometry of spaces built for smaller people. He put his headphones in. He closed his eyes. He was not looking for attention. He never looked for attention. Flight 2247 to Los Angeles. Supposed to depart at 8:15 a.m. On time. At 8:02, a flight attendant named Cassandra Bloom, 29 years old, approached seat 2A with a tablet in her hand and a specific kind of expression on her face. It was the expression people use when they have decided something is a problem before they have verified whether it actually is. She said, "Sir, I'm going to need you to come with me." Shaq opened one eye. He took out one earbud. He said, "Excuse me." She said, "We have a report from another passenger about your bag." He looked at his carry-on in the overhead bin where he had placed it 6 minutes earlier. He said, "My bag." She said, "Yes, sir. I need to ask you to come with me to speak with our air marshals." The cabin went completely quiet. Every person in first class was now pretending not to look directly at the largest man most of them had ever seen being told to get off a plane. Shaq O'Neal did not raise his voice. He did not argue. He did not ask what the report said, or who filed it, or why. He put his earbud back in his bag. He stood. He bent his head to avoid the overhead bin. He followed Cassandra Bloom off the plane. What happened in the next 22 minutes, in the jetway of Gate C-19 at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport on a Tuesday morning in September, would become one of the most discussed airline incidents in the country before the week was out. But here is what nobody on that plane knew. There was a file, buried in the corporate records of the airline's parent company. A document that connected Shaquille O'Neal to this flight, this airline, and the paychecks of every employee on board, in a way that nobody had anticipated and nobody was going to see coming. Stay with us through this entire video, because what gets uncovered in the hours after this moment, what a 23-year-old gate agent named Marcus Webb discovers when he pulls up the wrong screen on his terminal, is something that will change everything you think you know about who was really in charge at Gate C-19 that morning. And when it all comes out, when every piece of this connects, you will never look at a boarding pass the same way again. But to understand what happened in that jetway, you have to go back. You have to go back past the 4 NBA championships and the finals MVP trophies and the doctorate in education and the 15 All-Star selections, past the Orlando Magic and the Los Angeles Lakers and the Miami Heat and the Boston Celtics, past the commercials and the shoe deals and the arena that shook every time he walked in, past all of it. You have to go back to Newark, New Jersey, 1984. A boy 12 years old who was already 6 feet tall and could not fit into a school desk without turning it sideways. His mother, Lucille O'Neal, worked 2 jobs, and sometimes 3. She made every meal out of nothing that tasted like something. She kept the apartment clean and the boy fed and told him, more times than he could count, "You are not too much, Shaquille. The world is still catching up to you." She meant it about his size. She meant it about everything. His stepfather, Sergeant Philip Harrison, United States Army, said it differently. He looked the boy in the eye, and he said, "Being big means nothing if you don't stand for something." He said it once, and he did not repeat it because he was a military man, and he believed that if something needed to be said twice, it had not been said correctly the first time. Shaq stood for something, not the loud way, the quiet way, the way that does not make headlines until it does. The way that files paperwork through holding companies and signs leases and writes checks from accounts that do not have his name on them and declines credit when offered, and asks instead that the thing just get done. That is who was sitting in seat 2A on the morning of September 17, 2024. That is who got off the plane. The jetway smelled like jet fuel and recycled air, a carpet that had been gray once and was now a color that did not have a name. Fluorescent lights overhead, the kind that make everyone look slightly unwell. 2 air marshals, both in plain clothes, one standing, one with a tablet, were waiting at the end of the jetway. A 3rd airline employee, a man in a navy blue manager's uniform, stood to the side with his arms folded. The man in the navy uniform was Derek Holt, 44 years old, station manager, Hartsfield Jackson, for the airline in question, which we will call by its initials, TCA, Transcontinental Air. He had been station manager for 11 years. He had handled removal situations before. He considered this one routine. He did not recognize Shaquille O'Neal. This is a fact. Derek Holt, 44 years old, 11 years in aviation management, did not know who was standing 6 inches taller than everyone else in the jetway. He was not a basketball fan. He was not much of any sports fan. He managed an airport station. He went home and watched procedural crime dramas and fell asleep before the ending. He did not know. He said, "Sir, we have a report from another passenger that your bag was placed in a bin designated for other passengers and that you were behaving in a way that was making people uncomfortable." Shaq said, "I put my bag in the bin above my seat." Derek said, "The report says it was not above your seat." Shaq said, "It was above my seat." Derek said, "Sir, I'm going to need to ask you to submit to a secondary screening." One of the air marshals stepped forward. Shaq looked at the air marshal. He looked at Derek. He said, "Okay." He put his hands out, wrists up. The cabin went completely quiet again. Passengers near the front of the plane had a clear view into the jetway. 2 of them took out their phones. One of them started recording. The secondary screening took 14 minutes. It found nothing. There was no threat. There was no contraband. There was no irregularity of any kind. His bag was a standard carry-on with clothes, headphones, a protein bar, and a book about business strategy, with a bookmark on page 214. At 8:24 a.m., Derek Holt said, "You're free to reboard." Shaq said, "Thank you." He went back on the plane. He sat in seat 2A. He put his headphones in. He looked out the window. By 8:31, when the plane began to push back from the gate, a video was already uploading to 3 separate social media platforms. By the time the wheels lifted off the runway at 8:46 a.m., the video had been viewed 60,000 times. By the time the plane crossed the Mississippi River at 37,000 feet, it had been viewed 400,000 times. By the time Shaquille O'Neal landed at LAX at 11:19 a.m. Pacific Time, it had been viewed 11 million times. But none of that is the story. The story is what Marcus Webb found. Marcus Webb, 23 years old, was a gate agent at Hartsfield Jackson. He had been working for TCA for 14 months. He was tall and thin and wore his uniform with the specific slightly too large quality of someone who bought their uniform one size up so they could layer a sweatshirt underneath in the winter, which he planned to do when the winter came. He worked gate C19 most mornings. He was good at his job. He liked the job. He liked the rhythm of it, the specific purpose of a gate agent's morning when flights were departing on time and the board was green. He had been at the adjacent gate, C17, when the situation at seat 2A unfolded. He had heard about it. He had seen Shaq walk through the gate, the way everyone who was paying attention had seen Shaq walk through the gate, because you notice when a 7'1" man passes 6 feet in front of you at 7:42 in the morning. He had not intervened. He was not assigned to C19 that morning. It was not his place. At 9:14 a.m., after his own 8:45 departure had pushed back, Marcus Webb was doing his post-departure paperwork at the C-17 terminal. He was supposed to be pulling up the seating manifest for his next flight. He typed in the flight number wrong, transposed 2 digits. The screen that came up was not his next flight. It was an investment disclosure document. Specifically, it was a shareholder disclosure required by the FAA for airlines operating under specific financial restructuring agreements, filed October 2022. It listed the silent investors who had participated in TCA's emergency capital raise following the airline's near collapse during the industry downturn. Marcus Webb was not supposed to have access to this document. The system glitch that showed it to him lasted 11 seconds before the terminal auto-corrected and returned to the standard agent interface. But Marcus Webb was 23 years old, and he read fast. He read the names on the investor list. One of them was SHQ Capital Group, LLC. He stared at the screen. Then the screen changed. He sat at the terminal for a long moment. He knew that name, not from the document, from somewhere else. He thought about it. He pulled out his phone. He searched SHQ Capital Group, LLC. The top result was a 2022 Forbes article about anonymous investors who had helped stabilize 3 major companies during the economic pressure of that year. SHQ Capital Group was listed. The article noted that SHQ Capital Group was a private investment vehicle associated with a prominent athlete entrepreneur who had declined to be identified. Marcus clicked to the next article, a 2023 Wall Street Journal piece about TCA's recovery. It mentioned SHQ Capital Group by name as one of the entities that had taken a significant position in the airline when it was struggling, a position that had allowed TCA to avoid bankruptcy and retain its workforce of 41,000 employees. 41,000 employees. Marcus Webb, 23 years old, gate agent, 14 months with TCA, looked at his phone. He looked at gate C19 across the terminal, where flight 2247 had departed at 8:46 a.m. with Shaquille O'Neal in seat 2A. He sat very still for 4 full seconds. Then he picked up his phone and he called his supervisor. His supervisor was a woman named Renata Osei Mensah, 41 years old, 12 years with TCA, known among the gate agents for being the kind of manager who did not ask you to repeat yourself and did not tell you something you already knew. She answered on the second ring. Marcus said, "Renata, I need to show you something." Renata Osei Mensah, 41 years old, came to the C-17 terminal at 9:31 a.m. Marcus showed her the screenshot he had taken of his phone screen before the terminal had auto-corrected. She looked at it, she looked at Marcus. She looked at the screenshot again. She said, "How did you get this?" He explained. She said nothing for 7 seconds. Then she said, "Come with me." They walked to the station manager's office. Derek Holt was at his desk. He had a cup of coffee he had not touched. He was reading a summary of the morning's incidents, which included the Seat 2A situation, which he had written up as resolved. Renata closed the door behind them. She said, "Derek, do you know who SHQ Capital Group is?" Derek said, "That a company?" She put Marcus's phone on his desk, screenshot up. Derek looked at it. He looked at the investor list. He looked at the SHQ Capital Group entry. He looked back at Renata. She said, "The man you removed from the plane this morning. The man you had screened in the jetway." Derek said, "The basketball player." She said, "He owns part of this airline." The office was very quiet. Somewhere outside, a tug was moving a plane across the tarmac. The radio on Derek's desk murmured gate assignments in the flat, neutral voice of airline operations. Derek Holt, station manager, TCA, Hartsfield Jackson, set down his coffee cup. He pressed his hand over his mouth. He kept it there for 6 seconds. Meanwhile, at 37,000 feet, Shaquille O'Neal was watching a movie on his phone with his headphones in. He was not thinking about the morning. He was thinking about a meeting he had at 2 o'clock in Los Angeles. He was thinking about a call he needed to make to his daughter. He was thinking about whether the protein bar he had packed was going to be adequate for the 3 hours between Atlanta and LA. He was not thinking about the jetway. He was not thinking about Derek Holt. He was not thinking about what his presence in that airline's capital structure meant to the people who had made the decision in seat C-19's jetway. He never thought about it. That was the point. His attorney, a woman named Patricia Wynn, 53 years old, based in New York, had structured the TCA investment through SHQ Capital Group specifically because Shaq had asked her to. He had said, "I don't want my name in it. I don't want people to know. If the airline stabilizes and keeps its people working, that is the goal. The goal is not for anyone to know I did it." Patricia had said, "Then why do it?" He had said, "Because 41,000 people have jobs. Because those jobs have health insurance. Because those jobs are how some of those people pay for things their children need. That's why." Patricia had been his attorney for 16 years. She did not ask follow-up questions when he said things like that. She just structured the investment and filed the paperwork and made sure SHQ Capital Group was as far from his name as possible. That had been October of 2022, 2 years ago. He had not thought about it much since, but Derek Holt was thinking about it now. Derek Holt spent 37 minutes at his desk after Renata and Marcus left his office. During those 37 minutes, he did 3 things. He verified, through the company's internal investment registry, that SHQ Capital Group held a 5.2% stake in TCA Holdings, the airline's parent company, a stake that represented a capital infusion of approximately $68 million made at the moment of maximum corporate distress in October 2022. He pulled up the video footage from Gate C-19 between 7:42 and 8:46 a.m. He watched it twice. And then he sat at his desk and looked at the wall for 11 minutes. He picked up the phone and called his regional director. He said, "I need to tell you something." The regional director's name was Carolyn Fitch, 58 years old, based in Dallas. She had been with TCA for 26 years. She had seen many things. She had handled many situations. She listened to Derek Holt describe the morning's events in chronological order without interrupting him. When he finished, she said, "Is he still on that flight?" Derek said, "Lands at LAX at 11:19 Pacific." She said, "What did he do when they cleared him?" Derek said, "He said thank you." He went back to his seat. Long pause. Carolyn said, "He said thank you." Derek said, "Yes, ma'am." Another long pause. She said, "I'll call his representative." At 11:26 a.m. Pacific Time, 7 minutes after Flight 2247 landed at LAX, Shaquille O'Neal's phone rang. He was still in the plane, waiting for the aisle to clear. He looked at the screen. It was Kevin Okafor, his operations director. He said, "What?" Kevin said, "TCA Corporate just called. They want to speak with you." Shaq said, "About this morning." Kevin said, "How did you know?" He said, "Because someone figured it out." "What did Carolyn Fitch want?" Kevin paused. "How do you know her name?" Shaq said, "She's been regional director for 6 years. I know who runs my investments." Kevin said, "She wants to apologize formally. She wants to discuss what happened. She's also dealing with the video." Shaq said, "What video?" Kevin said, 11 million views as of an hour ago. The plane was clearing. A flight attendant was moving down the aisle collecting cups. Somewhere near the front, a child was asking her father something repeatedly. Shaq said, "I don't want an apology." Kevin said, "I know." Shaq said, "I want to know if Cassandra Bloom still has a job." Kevin paused. "Who?" Shaq said, "The flight attendant, Cassandra, 29 years old. She was doing what someone told her to do. I want to make sure she doesn't get blamed for something that wasn't her decision." Kevin was quiet. He said, "I'll find out." Shaq said, "And Marcus Webb?" Kevin said, "The gate agent?" Shaq said, "He's 23. He found something he wasn't supposed to find, and he told the right person. I want to know how he's doing." Kevin said, "How do you already know his name?" Shaq said, "Kevin, just find out." He got off the plane. He walked through LAX the way he always walked through airports, with his head slightly down, moving at a pace that discourages conversation, flanked by no one because he did not travel with a security team because he had never needed one and preferred not to have one. People saw him. They always saw him. A few reached for phones. Most just watched. He kept walking. Outside the terminal, the Los Angeles afternoon was doing what LA afternoons do in September, which is be aggressively beautiful and slightly unreal. The sun had that quality of California sun that makes everything look slightly more significant than it actually is. He got into the car. He looked at his phone. 11.3 million views. He put the phone in his pocket. He looked out the car window at the LAX traffic and the palm trees and the September California light, and he thought about a flight attendant named Cassandra Bloom, who was 29 years old and had done exactly what she was told to do, and was probably, right now, very afraid. He picked up the phone. He called Kevin. He said, "I'm going to need TCA's HR director's direct line, and I need you to reach Renata Ose-Mensah at Hartsfield. She's the supervisor who handled the situation correctly." Kevin said, "Handled it correctly how?" "She was involved in the removal." Shaq said, "No. She figured out what happened and she went and told the right people. That's a different thing. That's the opposite of the problem." Kevin said, "What do you want to do?" Shaq was quiet for a moment. He said, "Nothing public. I want to make sure the people at the bottom don't pay for a decision made at the top. That's all." Kevin said. "And Derek Holt?" Shaq said. "What about him?" Kevin said. "He's the station manager. He authorized the removal." Shaq was quiet for a long moment. He said, "Did he know who I was when he authorized it?" Kevin said, "No." Shaq said, Then he made a call based on incomplete information. That's not the same as malice. He paused. What did he say when he found out? Kevin said. He called his regional director immediately and disclosed everything. Shaq was quiet. He said, "That's a man who can be trusted with information." He put the phone in his pocket. He looked out the window. The car moved through LA traffic. Someone on the sidewalk recognized him through the glass and pointed. He did not acknowledge it. He was thinking about something else. He was thinking about his mother, about what she had said once, when he was young, maybe 15, when he had come home from school angry about something he couldn't even remember now. She had sat him down. She had said, "How you treat people when they treat you badly, Shaquille. That is who you really are. Anyone can be good when things are easy. The question is who you are when things are not easy." He had been thinking about that for 38 years. It was why he had not said anything in the jetway, not because he was afraid, not because he was uncertain, because raising his voice in that jetway would have been the easiest possible thing to do and the least useful, and he was not interested in the easiest possible thing. He was interested in what actually helped. But the video had 11 million views. By the time Shaq arrived at his 2 o'clock meeting in Century City, it had 16 million. By 6 p.m. Pacific, it had 22 million. TCA's social media team was attempting to manage the response, which is the corporate way of saying they were posting statements that satisfied no one while the internet decided what it thought. What the internet thought was not favorable. Derek Holt's full name had been found. His LinkedIn profile had been discovered. The flight manifest had been partially leaked by someone on the plane. 3 news organizations had called TCA's corporate communications team by noon. Carolyn Fitch, regional director, was managing 7 separate urgent situations simultaneously from her desk in Dallas. One of them was the video. One of them was the legal team's preliminary assessment. One of them was a call from TCA's CEO, a man named Gerald Park, 61 years old, who had been at a golf tournament in Scottsdale when his phone started ringing at 8:47 a.m. and had not stopped ringing since. Gerald Park called Kevin Okafor at 4:15 p.m. Pacific. He said, "I need to speak with Shaq." Kevin said, "He's in a meeting." Gerald said, "Please tell him I'm calling." Kevin said, "I'll pass that along." Shaq called Gerald Park at 5:52 p.m. from the parking structure adjacent to his Century City meeting. Gerald Park answered on the first ring. He said, "Shaq, I am profoundly sorry. What happened this morning was," Shaq said. "Gerald, stop." Silence. Shaq said, "I have one ask." Gerald said, "Anything." Shaq said, "The people at the bottom of this morning don't lose anything because of it. Not Cassandra Bloom, not Marcus Webb, not the air marshals, not Renata Ose-Mensah. They were doing their jobs. Some of them were doing their jobs particularly well. None of them designed the policy that put us in that jetway. That's what I want." Gerald Park was quiet for a moment. He said, "Done." Shaq said, "And I want a written policy review. I want TCA to look at the process that allowed a report from one passenger, with no corroborating evidence, to result in the physical removal of another passenger. I want that process reviewed, and I want to see the results of the review." Gerald said, "We will commit to that publicly." Shaq said, "Not publicly. Internally. I don't want this to be a public spectacle. I want it to be fixed." Another pause. Gerald said, "You're not going to make a statement." Shaq said, "No." Gerald said, "The video." Shaq said, "Gerald, I didn't get off that plane angry. I got off that plane because someone asked me to. I went through secondary screening because someone asked me to, and then I got back on the plane. If people watch that video and decide something about what they saw, that's between them and the video. I'm not going to narrate it for them." Gerald Park was quiet for a long moment. He said, "Is there anything you want for yourself?" Shaq said, "Yeah." A paused. Shaq said, "Make sure Marcus Webb gets whatever training or opportunities he wants. He found something he wasn't supposed to find, and he used it to fix a problem instead of using it to protect himself. That's a kid who knows what integrity looks like." Gerald Park said, "Consider it done." At 7:14 p.m. Pacific Time, Shaquille O'Neal posted 3 words on his personal social media account. No explanation, no video, no commentary, just 3 words. "I'm good, next." By midnight, that 3-word post had been shared 1.4 million times. By the following morning, every major news organization had used it as the headline. But the real story was still underneath, still in the paperwork, still in the investment registry at TCA Holdings. $68 million, October 2022. The moment the airline had been 41 days from bankruptcy. The moment that, if it had gone differently, would have meant the end of 41,000 jobs. The full story came out 8 days later, not through Shaq. Through a financial journalist named Dori Castellano, 47 years old, based in New York, who had been tracking anonymous investments in the airline industry since the industry downturn, and who had, in the months before September 17, 2024, been assembling a piece about the hidden investors who had saved 3 major American airlines from collapse. She published on September 25, 2024. The piece was 12,000 words. It included the SHQ Capital Group disclosure. It included the $68 million figure. It included a timeline showing that at the moment TCA had received the SHQ Capital infusion, the airline had been 41 days from filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. It included a quote from a source close to the investor, a quote that read, "He didn't do it because he thought the airline deserved it. He did it because 41,000 people had mortgages." The piece was read 47 million times in the first 72 hours. Marcus Webb was at work at C-17 when it published. He read it on his phone during his break. He sat on a bench near gate C-19, which was, that morning, boarding a 10:15 departure to Denver, and he read the whole thing. He read the part about October 2022. He read the part about the 41,000 employees. He read the source quote about mortgages. He put his phone down. He looked at gate C-19. He thought about the morning of September 17th, about the screen that had come up for 11 seconds, about the name he had seen, about the call he had made to Renata, about the decision, which had felt small at the time, to tell someone what he had found. He thought about a 7'1" man in seat 2A, putting his headphones back in, going back to his seat, saying thank you. He picked up his phone. He called his mother. His mother, Denise Webb, 48 years old, worked as a home health aide in a suburb of Atlanta. She had been with TCA since Marcus was hired because the health insurance was good, and because she had said to her son, "You keep that job, Marcus. You keep it." She answered on the second ring. She said, "Baby, I saw the article." He said, "Yeah." She said, "He kept our jobs, Marcus. Mine too. Because of him you have a job. Because of you having a job, I have the insurance." Marcus sat on the bench near gate C-19. He did not say anything for a moment. Then he said, "I just wanted to call you." She said, "I know." He said, "I wanted to tell you you're going to be okay." She said, "Baby." He said, "You're going to be okay." She was quiet for a moment. She said, "So are you." Behind him, the gate agent at C-19 began boarding Zone 1 for the 10:15 to Denver. The announcement was in the flat, neutral voice that airports use to make everything sound ordinary. Marcus Webb, 23 years old, stood up. He went back to his gate. He went back to work. 3 weeks after the article published, TCA announced a formal review of its in-flight passenger conduct protocols. The review was chaired by Carolyn Fitch and included consultants from 3 independent civil rights organizations. It took 4 months. It resulted in a 40-page internal document that revised the policy for acting on passenger complaints about other passengers, establishing new evidentiary standards that had to be met before any removal action could be initiated. The policy was named the Webb Protocol internally, for reasons that were never formally announced, but that everyone at TCA who needed to know, knew. Derek Holt remained station manager at Hartsfield-Jackson. He completed a 2-day training on the new protocol in January of 2025. He told the training facilitator, privately, that the morning of September 17, 2024, was the most clarifying day of his professional life. He meant it the way you mean something when you have had time to sit with it. Cassandra Bloom, 29 years old, flight attendant, continued on her regular routes. She was not disciplined. She was not reassigned. She completed the same protocol training as the rest of the cabin crew. In February of 2025, she was promoted to senior flight attendant. She did not know about the calls Shaq had made, or the specific protection that had been put in place for her. She did not know that on the day after September 17th, when TCA management had been deciding how to handle the aftermath, a very specific instruction had been given from the direction of SHQ Capital Group, through Patricia Wynn, through Carolyn Fitch, through Gerald Park, to the effect that no frontline employee was to be made a casualty of this situation. She found out about it a year later, in a conversation with Renata Osei-Mensah, who told her over coffee in the TCA break room at Hartsfield. Cassandra said, "He protected me?" Renata said, "He protected all of us." Marcus Webb was offered enrollment in TCA's Management Development Program in November of 2024. The offer came with a note from Gerald Park's office that said only, "We have been told you have good instincts. We would like to develop them." He accepted. He was 23 years old. He had been with TCA for 14 months. He had typed a flight number wrong and changed the course of the morning. Renata Osei Mensah, 41 years old, 12 years with TCA, was given the station manager role at Hartsfield-Jackson's expanded international terminal when it opened in March of 2025. She was the youngest person to hold that role in TCA's history. She had been recommended by Carolyn Fitch, who had told Gerald Park, "She is the one who handled September 17th correctly. Everything that happened that day went right because of her. Give her the job," Gerald Park had said. Done. On a quiet Tuesday morning in October of 2025, Shaquille O'Neal boarded a TCA flight from Atlanta to New York, seat 2A. He sat down. He folded himself in. He turned sideways to let his knees clear the seat in front. He put his headphones in. A flight attendant came through the first-class cabin. She was young, new. He did not know her. She offered him a drink. He asked for water. She brought it. She said, "Mr. O'Neal, welcome aboard." He said, "Thank you." She started to move away. He said, "What's your name?" She turned back. She said, "Imani." He said, "How long have you been with TCA, Imani?" She said, 3 months. He said, "You like it?" She said, "Yes, sir, very much." He said, "Good. Keep it that way." She smiled and moved on down the aisle. He looked out the window, the Atlanta tarmac in October, the morning sky, a tug moving a plane across the apron, the flat neutral announcement from the gate. He put his headphones in. He thought about 41,000 jobs. He thought about a home health aide in a suburb of Atlanta who had health insurance because her son had a job at an airport. He thought about a protocol that was now named for a 23-year-old who had typed a flight number wrong. He thought about his mother. He thought about her saying, "How you treat people when they treat you badly, Shaquille. That is who you really are." He thought about what he had said in a jetway in September, which was, "Okay, and thank you." That was the whole answer. That was all of it. Because somewhere out there right now, someone is being asked to prove who they are when the situation is not fair, when the room is watching, when the easiest thing to do is the loudest thing, and the hardest thing to do is to say thank you and sit back down and let the story be what it is without narrating it. And the question is not what that person will say. The question is who they will be. That is what being big means. Not the 7 feet 1 inch. Not the 325 pounds. Not the championships or the contracts or the investments that show up on a screen for 11 seconds and change a morning. It means being the thing you are, quietly, even when no one is watching, especially when no one is watching. And it means saying thank you when you should say nothing else. That is the story of Seat 2A. Before you go, drop a comment right now and tell us where you are watching from. From Atlanta, from Los Angeles, from Newark, from any city where someone quietly kept a thing going that people needed without ever asking for credit. We read every single one, and we love knowing where this community is coming from all around the world. And if this story moved you, if it made you feel something real, please hit that like button right now. It takes 1 second, and it helps this story reach someone out there who really needs to hear it today. Someone who is being treated unfairly right now, and is trying to decide who they want to be in the moment. Share this video with one person today. Just one. The one who keeps things together behind the scenes. The one who types a flight number wrong and changes a morning. The one who said thank you when they had every right to say something else. Because that is exactly how this kind of dignity travels. One seat, one boarding pass, one thank you at a time. Now click on the video appearing on your screen right now because the next story is something you are absolutely not going to see coming. We will see you there. There is something about what happened in that jetway that Derek Holt has thought about many times since September of 2024, and that he told the protocol training facilitator in January of 2025, and that he has not told many other people because it is not the kind of thing that sounds right in most contexts. He said, the man was calm, not the calm of someone who was resigned. The calm of someone who had already made a decision about who he was going to be in this situation, before the situation presented itself. The calm of preparation. Derek had worked in aviation management for 11 years. He had seen many situations where passengers were asked to leave planes. He had seen anger, he had seen argument, he had seen people take out phones and threaten to post and threaten to sue and threaten to call congresspeople. He had seen people fold, he had seen people escalate in ways that made a small problem into a large one. He had never seen someone say okay. He had never seen someone extend his wrists, voluntarily. He had never seen someone say thank you when they were cleared, Derek Holt said, in the January training, to the room of 12 supervisors and 2 external consultants. I did not know who he was. I did not know anything about SHQ Capital Group. I did not know anything about October 2022. I knew only what I saw in that jetway, and what I saw was a man who was choosing something, very deliberately, in a moment that gave him every reason to choose something else. He said, I want you to know that what I saw changed how I understood this job. He said, I went back to my desk and I called Carolyn. Not because of the investment, because of what I had seen. One of the external consultants asked, what did you see? Derek said, I saw someone who understood that the way you respond to a situation is the most powerful tool you have. More powerful than the money, more powerful than the fame, more powerful than being 7 feet 1 inch tall. The way you respond is the argument. He said thank you, and he went back to his seat and his response was the argument. For everything. The room was quiet for a moment. Then one of the supervisors said, did you ever meet him? Derek said, no. The supervisor said, do you want to? Derek thought about it for a moment. He said, I think I already know what I need to know. The journalist Dori Castellano had been tracking anonymous aviation investments for 18 months before September 17, 2024. The SHQ Capital Group thread had been one of 7 she was following. She had known for 4 of those months that SHQ was connected to a prominent athlete. She had not known which one. The disclosure language was deliberately opaque. Patricia Wynn, Shaq's attorney, was very good at what she did. What broke it open for Dori was the video. Not because the video told her anything she didn't already know about SHQ. The video told her nothing about SHQ. The video told her something about the person. She had watched the video the morning of September 17th, the way most people had watched it, on her phone, in 37 seconds. She had watched a very large man in a gray sweatshirt extend his wrists in a jetway and say thank you when he was cleared. She had noted the specific quality of his composure. She had made a note in her file. The note said, this is someone who has decided something about how they move through the world. Whoever SHQ is, this is the kind of person they are. She spent the next 6 days pulling threads she had been hesitant to pull before. She spoke to 4 financial contacts who had been present for the TCA capital raise in October 2022. She confirmed the SHQ connection. She confirmed the $68 million figure. She confirmed the conditions of the investment, which included a requirement that no workforce reduction occur in the 12 months following the capital infusion. A requirement that had been honored. All 41,000 jobs. She called Patricia Wynn. Patricia Wynn said, we have no comment on our client's investment activities. Dori said, I'm going to publish with or without a comment. I wanted you to know. There was a pause. Patricia said, if you're going to publish it correctly. Don't make it about the video. Make it about October 2022. Dori said, that's already my intention. Patricia said, then we have nothing further to discuss. Dori published on September 25th. She published it correctly. She made it about October 2022, about the 41 days, about the 41,000 jobs. The video was mentioned once, in the 14th paragraph, as context for how the story became known. It was not the point of the story, it was the footnote. This was, she said later, the right choice. The story was not about what happened in a jetway. The story was about what happened 2 years before the jetway, when no one was watching, when there was nothing to gain, when a decision was made to put $68 million into an airline that was 41 days from bankruptcy because 41,000 people had mortgages. That was the story. The jetway was just where it became visible. Cassandra Bloom, 30 years old now, read the piece at 37,000 feet, somewhere over Nevada, on a flight from Atlanta to San Francisco. She read it on her phone during her break. She read it to the end. She sat in the small crew area at the back of the plane, and she read the part about the protection that had been put in place for frontline employees, and she thought about the morning of September 17th. She thought about what she had been asked to do. She thought about what she had done. She thought about the moment when the large man in the gray sweatshirt had looked at her and said, okay, no argument, no raised voice, just, okay. She had not understood that moment at the time. She understood it now. She finished her break. She stood. She walked back through the cabin. She served drinks. She answered questions. She helped a woman in 14C with an overhead bin that was stuck. She smiled at a child in 18A who was looking at her with the specific, focused attention of a very small person who has decided that flight attendants are the most interesting people they have ever seen. She said, "What's your name?" The child said, "Amara." She said, "That's a beautiful name, Amara. Are you flying to San Francisco?" Amara said, "Yes." Cassandra said, "It's a beautiful city, you're going to love it." Amara smiled. Cassandra moved on down the aisle. She was doing her job. She was very good at her job. And somewhere far below, at 37,000 feet, the country was moving past in the dark and the lights of the cities looked like scattered diamonds and the engines were running and all 41,000 people who had needed them to keep running were somewhere down there, going about their lives. And that was the whole thing. That was what it had cost. $68 million, and a decision made when no one was watching, and a requirement that the workforce be maintained, and 2 years of saying nothing, and then a jetway, and then thank you, and then next. Gerald Park, CEO of TCA Holdings, gave one interview in the month following the publication of Dori Castellano's piece. He spoke with the Wall Street Journal. He was asked about the SHQ investment. He said, "We are grateful to all of our investors." He was asked specifically about the terms. He said, "The terms were appropriate for the situation." He was asked if he had spoken with the investor since September 17th. He said yes. He was asked what the conversation was about. He said, "The conversation was about our employees." The interviewer said, "That's all?" Gerald Park said, "That's all." It was, in fact, not all. But the rest of it was not for a Wall Street Journal interview. The rest of it was for a phone call in a parking structure in Century City on a September afternoon. The rest of it was private. The rest of it was, make sure the people at the bottom don't pay, fix the policy, make sure Marcus Webb gets what he needs, and, I don't want an apology. Gerald Park had given the apology anyway, briefly and sincerely, at the beginning of the call before he was told to stop. He had accepted the redirection and moved on. He was a man who could do that. He had, after the call, sat at his desk in Scottsdale for a few minutes before going back into the golf tournament. He had thought about the 41 days in October 2022. He had thought about what those 41 days had meant for him, and for TCA, and for the 41,000 people who had jobs the following month because a decision had been made. He had not known, in October 2022, who the investor was. The deal had been handled through Patricia Wynn and 2 intermediaries. He had known only that the capital was clean, and the terms were fair, and the investor had one unusual condition, which was that there be no workforce reduction in the following 12 months. He had honored that condition. He had thought about it sometimes, since then, in the way that you think about things that made a difference without being entirely sure how they worked. He thought about it the morning of September 17th when his phone had started ringing at 8:47. He thought about it on the call in the parking structure. He thought about it now, sitting in Scottsdale, about to go back into a golf tournament. He thought, that was a person who knew something about 41,000 lives that the 41,000 people themselves did not know. He thought, that is a certain kind of knowledge to carry. He thought, thank you is not the right word. There is probably not a right word, but thank you is the one we have. On a quiet Wednesday morning in November of 2025, 14 months after September 17, 2024, Marcus Webb was at Gate C-19 at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. He was no longer a gate agent, he was in his second month of the TCA Management Development Program. He had come back to the gate that morning because his program supervisor had suggested spending time in different operational areas of the airport, and C-19 was where he had spent his first 14 months, and he knew it. He was watching a departure board. The 8:15 to Los Angeles was green. On time. He thought about a Tuesday morning in September the previous year. He thought about a screen that had been up for 11 seconds. He thought about a decision to make a call. He did not know that the decision to make that call, and the specific way he had handled what he found, had been noted by Gerald Park's office, had been passed to Carolyn Fitch, had been discussed with Shaquille O'Neal in a parking structure on the afternoon of September 17th, had been the reason for the training program offer that had arrived in November. He did not know any of that. He knew only that he had made a call and something had changed, and that the change had rippled out in directions he could not have predicted, and was still rippling. He looked at the departure board, 8:15 to Los Angeles, on time. He thought, some mornings are ordinary. Some mornings change things. You cannot always tell them apart until later. He went to his next appointment. He had a lot to learn. He was ready to learn it. Outside, on the tarmac at Hartsfield-Jackson, a tug was pushing a plane back from a gate. The November Atlanta morning was cold and clear. Planes were moving, people were boarding. Somewhere inside the terminal, an announcement was going out in the flat, neutral voice that airports use to make everything sound ordinary. It was an ordinary morning, which meant it could be anything. There is a detail about the original video that most people who watched it did not notice. The video was 37 seconds long. It was filmed by a passenger in row 3 through the gap between the seats. The camera angle was low and slightly compressed by the narrow space. The audio was not great. The sound of the plane, the hum of systems, the ambient noise of 40 people breathing and shifting and being quiet. What most people saw was the large man in the gray sweatshirt standing in the jetway with his hands out. They saw the air marshal approach. They saw the scream begin. They saw it end. They saw the man come back onto the plane. What fewer people noticed was the 45 seconds after the man came back onto the plane. The video did not stop when Shaq sat down. The person filming kept the phone up. The camera caught the first-class cabin in the moments after he returned to his seat. You could see 6 passengers. 3 of them were looking at their phones. 2 were looking at the man who had just returned from the jetway. 1 was looking out the window. None of them said anything. None of them spoke to him. None of them said, "Are you okay?" None of them said, "That was wrong." None of them said anything. And the man in seat 2A put his headphones in and looked out the window, and the plane began to push back from the gate. This detail, the 45 seconds of silence, was the part that Dori Castellano included in the 14th paragraph of her piece. She wrote, "The most instructive part of the video is not the removal. It is the 45 seconds after the return. An entire first-class cabin, 12 people who had witnessed something, and not one of them said a word to the man who had just been returned to his seat. He did not ask them to. He had already told his story without words, in the jetway, and was now done telling it." She wrote, "This is what dignity looks like in practice. It does not need an audience or a response. It is simply what a person does and how they carry themselves, and then it is over." The piece was widely quoted. The 14th paragraph was widely quoted. It was quoted in publications that do not normally quote travel writing. It was quoted in opinion columns about character, and about how fame does or does not protect a person, and about what public behavior looks like when there is no calculation behind it. It was quoted by a high school teacher in Cleveland, Ohio, named Patricia Jean Monroe, 52 years old, who taught her 11th graders about it as an example of what she called strategic dignity, a phrase she had coined herself, meaning the decision to express your full humanity in a moment that invites you to abandon it, not because you will necessarily win, but because that is who you have decided to be. Patricia Jean Monroe had been teaching for 26 years. She had been teaching strategic dignity, under various names for most of them. She read Dori's piece, and she printed the 14th paragraph, and she put it on the board in her classroom, and she told her students, "This is not about Shaquille O'Neal. This is about a decision. The decision to be, in a moment that costs something, the thing you have decided you are." 22 of her 24 students, she reported later, wrote about the incident in their journals that week. 3 of them wrote about a time when they had faced a similar choice, a smaller version, a version that did not involve airports or investments but did involve the same essential question, which is, who do you want to be when the situation is not fair? She sent the journals to Dori Castellano without identifying the students. Dori read them. She did not include them in the piece. They were private. But she kept them. She kept them in a folder on her desk that she labeled, simply, "What the Story Did." Renata Osei-Mensah, 41 years old, new station manager at Hartsfield's International Terminal, started her first week in the new role in March of 2025. The terminal was larger than the domestic operations she had managed before. More gates, more flights, more people in more languages looking for more things. She walked through the terminal on her first morning, March 3, 2025. In the specific way she walked through every new space, which is slowly and with attention. She noticed things. The light quality at Gate K7 that would be a problem during peak afternoon hours. The bottleneck at the international arrivals customs exit that was going to need a redesign. A security checkpoint staffing issue that was creating unnecessary delays. She noticed all of these things and made notes and went to her office and began making calls. She had been doing this for 12 years. She would do it for 12 more, probably. And somewhere in the history of how she came to have this role, which she had earned over 12 years of exactly this kind of attention, was a Tuesday morning in September of 2024, when she had walked into a station manager's office and closed the door and put a phone on a desk and said, "Derek, do you know who SHQ Capital Group is?" That moment was in the history. It would always be in the history. She had not known, when she walked into the office, that the history was going to work out this particular way. She had known only that there was information that needed to go somewhere, and she was the right person to take it there. She had been right about that. She was usually right about what needed to go somewhere, and who should take it. That was the job. She was good at it. She had always been good at it. At 8:46 a.m. Pacific Time on April 15, 2026, 19 months after September 17, 2024, a TCA flight from New York to Los Angeles pushed back from its gate at JFK. In the window seat of row 2, a man 7 feet 1 inch tall was negotiating the relationship between his knees and the seat in front of him. He had the aisle seat too, because the aisle seat and the window seat together were the only configuration that worked. He had been flying this way his entire adult life. A flight attendant came through the cabin with the pre-departure drink service. He asked for water. She brought it. He put his headphones in. He looked out the window at the JFK tarmac. He thought about a meeting he had in Los Angeles. He thought about a call he needed to make to his daughter. He thought about whether the book he had brought was the right book for a 5-hour flight, which it probably was. He did not think about September 17, 2024. He did not think about 41,000 jobs. He did not think about October 2022, or $68 million, or the web protocol, or the training that had been conducted in January, or the management development program, or Dory Castellano's piece, or Patricia Jean Monroe's classroom in Cleveland, or the folder on a journalist's desk labeled what the story did. He thought about his meeting, his daughter, the book. The plane began to push back. Ordinary Tuesday morning, 41,000 people going to work. The engines running. The way they were always going to keep running, because someone had made a decision in October of 2022, when there was nothing to gain from it except the knowledge that they had done it. And that knowledge had always been enough. It was still enough. It would always be enough. Outside JFK, the April New York morning was cold and clear and specific in the way of New York mornings in April, which is serious about being spring without fully committing to warmth. The planes moved on the tarmac. The departure board was green. The coffee in the terminal was already running low because it was 8:46 and the terminal had been full since 6. Someone was going somewhere. Many someones. 41,000 someones, all around the country, with health insurance and mortgages and children who were eating breakfast this morning because their parent had a job. The engines running, the way they were supposed to run. That is the story of Seat 2A. That is all of it. Every piece. From a jetway in Atlanta in September to October 2022, to $68 million to 11 seconds on a screen, to a call from Gate C-17, to a protocol that now has a name, to a classroom in Cleveland, to a journalist's folder, to a first-class cabin at JFK on a Tuesday morning in April. All of it from, okay, and, thank you, and, next. 3 words. The whole story. Everything that followed from being the person you decided to be before the situation presented itself. That is all. That is exactly enough. That is the story of what happens when the biggest man in the room decides the smallest possible response is the most powerful one. And it turns out he was right. He was always going to be right about that, because he had already decided, 40 years ago, when a woman in Newark told him, "You are not too much. The world is still catching up to you." It caught up. That morning in September, in a jetway at Gate C-19, when he said okay, and thank you, and went back to his seat, and looked out the window, and let the plane take him where he was going, which was always, already, exactly where he needed to be. There is one more person in this story who has not been named yet. Her name is Denise Webb, 48 years old, and she lives in a suburb of Atlanta called Smyrna, and she has worked as a home health aide for 11 years, and she is the reason Marcus Webb took the job at TCA in the first place. She had said, "The benefits, Marcus. The health insurance is good, and I need you to keep the health insurance," because her own situation, which she had not entirely detailed for her son, involved a condition that required regular monitoring and medication, and the specific peace of mind of knowing that the monitoring was covered. She had not told Marcus all of this. She had said, "The benefits are good." She had said, "Keep the job." He had kept the job. He had been keeping it for 14 months, which included the morning of September 17, 2024, which included the 11 seconds on the terminal screen, which included the call to Renata. All of it connected to, the benefits are good. Denise Webb, 48 years old, read Dori Castellano's piece on September 26, 2024, the day after it was published. She read it on her phone during her lunch break, parked in her car outside a client's house in Smyrna, Georgia. She read it carefully. She read the October 2022 section. She read the 41,000 jobs section. She read the workforce protection condition. She put her phone down. She looked at the windshield of her car. She had been with TCA's employee health plan since Marcus was hired. 14 months. The monitoring had been covered. The medication had been covered. The peace of mind had been there, quiet and reliable, the way good coverage is quiet and reliable, which is to say you only fully feel it when you imagine not having it. She imagined not having it for a moment. She thought about October 2022. She thought about 41 days. She thought about a decision made by someone she had never met, in a context she had never known about, that had kept the plan active, that had kept her son employed, that had kept the coverage in place. She picked up the phone. She called Marcus. He answered. She said, "Baby, I read the article." He said, "I know, Mom. I saw it." She said, "Did you know? When you made that call to Renata?" He said, "No." She said, "You just made the call." He said, "I just made the call." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I have something to tell you, about why I wanted you to keep that job." He said, "Okay." She told him, all of it, the condition, the monitoring, the medication, the reason the benefits had mattered more than he had known when she had said, "The benefits are good." He was quiet for a long time. He said, "Mom," she said, "I'm okay. I'm managing it. I just wanted you to know." He said, "Why didn't you tell me?" She said, "Because you were starting a new job, because I wanted you to focus, because some things a mother handles on her own, until she doesn't have to." He said, "Is that?" He stopped. He started again. "Is that why you said to keep the job no matter what?" She said, "One of the reasons." He said, "Mom." She said, "Marcus." He said, "I'm coming to see you this weekend." She said, "I know." He said, "I'm going to be there on Saturday." She said, "I'll make dinner." He said, "Mom." She said, "I love you." He said, "I love you." She put the phone down. She sat in her car outside her client's house in Smyrna, Georgia, in the September afternoon. She looked at the windshield. She looked at the street. A neighbor was walking a dog. A school bus was turning the corner. The afternoon had the specific quality of Atlanta September, which is, still summer, trying to be something else. She thought about Marcus at his terminal. She thought about 11 seconds. She thought about a call made to the right person. She thought about a chain of things, each one small, that had led to coverage, that had led to monitoring, that had led to management of something that was being managed. She thought, some things hold together without your knowing what is holding them. Some things were held together in October of 2022 by a person who had decided something in silence. And the things that were held together included her, had included her all along. She had just not known it. She went inside to her client. She did her job. She was very good at her job. She had been doing it for 11 years without asking for recognition, and without stopping, and without telling her son why the benefits needed to stay active. She just did it. And the thing that was holding her, she now knew, had been held by someone else who did not know her name and did not know her situation and had made a decision in October of 2022 that had included her in a category called 41,000 people have mortgages. She was in that category. She had always been in that category. She just knew it now. Marcus Webb drove to Smyrna on Saturday, September 28, 2024. He stayed through Sunday. He helped his mother with a few things around the house. He sat with her on the back porch in the September Atlanta evening, and they drank sweet tea and talked about many things, some of which were about the job, and the article, and the October 2022 section, and some of which were not about any of that, and were just about being a son and a mother on a back porch on a Saturday evening. Before he left on Sunday, he said, "I want you to tell me when things are hard." She said, "I know." He said, "I mean it." She said, "I know you mean it." He said, "Promise me." She looked at him. She said, "I promise." He hugged her. He got in his car. He drove back to Atlanta. She stood on the front porch and watched him go. The Sunday evening in Smyrna was warm and specific. The lights in the houses were coming on. Somewhere down the street, A lawnmower finished its last pass. She went back inside. She made dinner. She sat at her kitchen table. She thought about Saturday morning at Gate C19 almost a year ago. She thought about, the benefits are good. She thought about what the benefits being good had depended on. She thought, some things hold together because someone decided they should. She thought, sometimes you find out who decided. She thought, sometimes you don't. She thought, either way, the holding was real. Either way, it happened. Either way, you were held. And that is something worth knowing, even when you learn it late. Even when you learn it from a piece in a newspaper on your phone in a parking lot in Smyrna, Georgia. Even then, it is something. It is more than something. Because somewhere out there right now, there is a thing that is being held together by a decision someone made in private. A job, a plan, a building, a program, a network of services that 41,000 people depend on without knowing why it is still running. And the person who made the decision is not in that conversation. They are somewhere else. They are thinking about their next meeting, their daughter, the book they brought for a 5-hour flight. They are not thinking about the holding, but the holding is real. And the things being held include people you know, and people you love, and people who are going about their days without knowing that someone, in a moment of private decision-making, included them in a category called, people who need this to keep running. That is what it means to be big. Not the 7 feet 1 inch. Not the championships. Not the seat 2A. The decision made in October 2022. The decision made in a jetway in September 2024. The same decision. One decision. Over and over. To be the thing you are when no one is watching. To be the thing you are when the situation is not fair. To say, okay, and, thank you. And, next. That is the whole lesson. That is the only lesson. And it turns out it is more than enough. The passenger who filed the original report was never identified publicly. TCA's legal team reviewed the report as part of the protocol analysis. The report was found to be based on a misperception about the overhead bin assignment. The bin above seat 2A was in fact seat 2A's bin. The bag was placed correctly. The passenger who filed the report had been in seat 2C. Seat 2C's overhead bin is directly across the aisle from seat 2A's. The passenger had confused the two. That was the whole thing. That was the origin of the incident at Gate C19 on September 17, 2024. A confused overhead bin, a report filed in error, a protocol that before the web review required immediate action on any passenger complaint without a preliminary verification step. The new protocol required a 30-second bin check before any action was taken. 30 seconds. It was a small change. It would prevent many things. It was named for a 23-year-old who had typed a flight number wrong. This is, in the end, how most important changes happen. Not dramatically. Not from a summit or a policy conference or a high-level strategic initiative. From a bin confusion. From 11 seconds on a screen. From a call made to the right person. From a man who said okay and thank you, and next. Derek Holt understood this. He had said it in January, in the training room, to 12 supervisors and 2 external consultants. He had said, the change came from the smallest possible moment. A man extending his wrists in a jetway. That moment contained everything that followed. If he had done anything else in that jetway, the story is different. The protocol review never happens. We never know what we didn't know. The external consultant had said, what did he do that made the difference? Derek said, nothing. That's the point. He did the smallest possible thing. He extended his wrists, he said okay, he said thank you, he sat down. And that restraint, that specific choosing of the smallest possible response, was the thing that created the space for everything else to happen. The consultant had written that down. Derek had noticed. He said, it's easy to talk about dignity as a concept. It is very hard to watch someone practice it in real time, in a situation that costs them something. He said, I watched that. I watched it happen 6 inches from my face, and I still think about it every time I issue a removal order. He said, it changed the way I do this job. He said, not because I'm afraid of who the passenger might be. He said, because of what I saw him choose. The training room was quiet for a moment. Then Renata Ose-Mensah, who was in the room, said, and that's why we have the web protocol. Not because of the investment, because of what that choice made possible. Derek said, exactly that. They moved on to the next section of the training. The room was quiet in a different way after that. The way rooms are quiet when something true has been said and has been received and doesn't need to be elaborated on. Shaq flew many more TCA flights in the months after September 2024. He flew them the way he always flew. He sat in seat 2A or the equivalent. He asked for water. He put his headphones in. He looked out the window. He thought about meetings and daughters and books on page 214. He did not post about TCA. He did not give interviews about TCA. He did not leverage the moment in any direction. When journalists asked, Patricia Wynn said, "No comment on investment activities." When social media suggested he should speak, his account stayed quiet. When opinion writers argued he had a responsibility to address the incident publicly, the response was 3 words: "I'm good. Next." He was in fact good. He was in fact already on to the next thing, which was the thing he was always on to, which was the work, the meetings, the calls, the decisions made in private that landed in capital structures and workforce protection conditions and protocols named for people he had never met but had made inquiries about because it was the right thing to do, and he was interested in doing the right thing and not very interested in being seen doing it. That was the whole career, not just the basketball career, the whole career, from Newark forward. Being big enough to do something, deciding what that something should be, doing it, looking out the window, and letting the plane take you where you were going. At 11:19 a.m. Pacific Time on September 17, 2024, Flight 2047 from Atlanta to Los Angeles touched down at LAX. The wheels connected with the runway at the specific speed and angle that meant the flight was over, and the next thing was beginning. People unbuckled their seatbelts before the sign went off, the way people always do, because some habits are older than the seatbelt sign. In seat 2A, a man 7 feet 1 inch tall began the process of unfolding himself from a space that had been adequate but not ideal. He gathered his bag. He waited for the aisle to clear. He walked forward through the cabin. He thanked the crew at the door. He stepped off the plane. He walked through the jetway. He entered the terminal. He kept moving. 11 million people had watched a video of his morning. He had not watched it. He did not need to. He had been there. He knew what had happened. He knew who he had been. That was sufficient. That was always going to be sufficient. Because being big means nothing if you don't stand for something. And he had always known what he stood for, and he had stood for it. In a jetway at Gate C-19, on a Tuesday morning in September, when it cost something. Especially then, always then. That is the only time it counts. The gate at C-19 at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport is, by this point, an ordinary gate. It boards flights to Chicago and Denver and Newark and Dallas and a dozen other cities. Passengers line up in the zones. Zone 1 boards first. Zone 5 boards last. The carpet is the same color it always was. The lights are fluorescent. The announcement is flat and neutral. On most mornings, nothing particularly notable happens at Gate C-19. On the morning of September 17, 2024, something notable happened. By October of 2025, 13 months later, most of the people who had been there had moved on from the specific details of that morning. Cassandra Bloom was a senior flight attendant with different routes. Marcus Webb was in his management development program. Renata Ose-Mensah was running the international terminal. Derek Holt was still station manager, doing the work differently now, asking the 30-second question before any removal order. Denise Webb was managing her condition with coverage from TCA's employee health plan, which was still good. The morning had become part of the history of Gate C-19 the way most things become part of the history of a place, which is present but not prominent, known but not narrated, there in the background. On the morning of November 4, 2025, a flight attendant named Imani, 24 years old, 3 months with TCA, was preparing for a 9:15 departure to New York at Gate C-19. She had the pre-departure checklist on her tablet. She was moving through it efficiently. She had been told by her supervisor that the 9:15 was often full, and that the first-class cabin in particular tended to have passengers who had high expectations and low patience. Her supervisor had also said, "Just be good at your job and be kind. That's the whole thing." Imani had said, "Yes, ma'am." She had been good at her job, and she had been kind. For 3 months. She intended to keep being both. At 8:53 a.m., a man in a gray sweatshirt boarded through the jetway. He was very large. He turned slightly sideways to fit through the jetway door. He found his seat. He folded himself in. He adjusted his knees. Imani did not recognize him. She came through the first-class cabin with the pre-departure drink service. She offered a drink. He asked for water. She brought it. He said, "What's your name?" She said, "Imani." He said, "How long have you been with TCA, Imani?" She said, 3 months. He said, "You like it?" She said, "Yes, sir, very much." He said, "Good, keep it that way." She smiled and moved on. She did not know, in that moment, that she was speaking to the person who was a 5.2% shareholder in TCA Holdings. She did not know about October 2022, or SHQ Capital Group, or the $68 million, or the 41,000 jobs, or the web protocol, or Gate C19 13 months earlier. She knew only that he had asked her name and told her to keep liking the job. She thought, that was a nice thing to say. She moved to the next row. She did her job. The plane pushed back at 9:18, 3 minutes late because of a tug delay on the tarmac. By 9:30 it was airborne. By 9:32 Imani was moving through the cabin with the drink cart, asking each row what they wanted, writing it down, remembering without writing it down, the way you remember when you are good at the job and have been doing it for 3 months, and plan to do it for many more. In seat 2A, a man in a gray sweatshirt had his headphones in and was looking out the window at the Atlanta skyline below, which was small and specific in the October morning and then was gone as the plane banked north. He was thinking about a meeting he had in New York. He was thinking about a call he needed to make to his daughter. He was thinking about a book on page 2014 that he had not yet finished. He was not thinking about C19 or October 2022 or 41,000 people or Imani or any of it. He was just on a plane, going where he was going, same as always, and somewhere below, the city of Atlanta was doing what cities do in November, which is move and breathe and generate and maintain and hold itself together through 10,000 invisible systems, each one depending on the next, each one staffed by people whose names you will never know, each one running because someone, at some point, decided it should keep running. The plane climbed. The seatbelt sign stayed on a little longer than usual, because the air was choppy at 8,000 feet. Then it went off, and the morning continued, as mornings do. Ordinary, and necessary, and full of people going where they need to go. Held by things they cannot see, held by decisions made before they arrived. The way it has always worked. The way it will always work. When someone decides to make the decision that holds the thing together, that is the whole story. Everything else is details, good details, true details. But the whole story, one decision, in private, before anyone was watching, when it cost something. And, okay. And thank you. And next. That is all. That is everything. Every time. Outside Gate C19 at Hartsfield-Jackson. Another November morning. Another departure board. Green. Another flight. On time. Another set of 41,000 reasons why the engines keep running. And in seat 2A, somewhere above it all, a man looks out the window at the country below and lets the plane take him where he is going. Same as always. That is who he decided to be. That is who he is. Because being big means nothing if you don't stand for something. And he always knew what he stood for. And the planes keep running, and the jobs are there, and the coverage is there. And the morning continues, ordinary and held, the way every morning is held by the decisions of people whose names you may never know but whose choices are underneath everything you depend on, every day, without knowing it. That is the story. The whole story. Exactly that. Nothing more. Nothing less.